She was just cleaning the steps, until a limousine drenched her in mud without even slowing down. The woman inside never looked back, but someone across the street never looked away. Welcome to Tales by Ezra. Let's uncover what really happened. A thick, merciless wave of muddy water erupted from the side of the sleek, obsidian limousine, arcing through the crisp morning air like a deliberate insult before crashing down onto the frail figure of an elderly woman meticulously scrubbing the granite steps of a corporate skyscraper. The woman, 72-year-old Eleanor Vance, stumbled back, her worn bucket clattering, the dirty water within sloshing over her already soaked apron. Her spectacles, splattered with grime, magnified the shock in her gentle, cornflower blue eyes. The limousine, a fortress of tinted windows and polished chrome, didn't even pause. It glided past with the indifferent arrogance of a predator that had just swatted a fly, its powerful engine a low, contemptuous growl. From behind the darkened glass, Victoria Sterling, a woman whose wealth was matched only by her notorious disdain for anyone she deemed beneath her, might have caught a fleeting glimpse of the scene. Or perhaps she was too engrossed in her phone, her world too insulated by layers of privilege to register the casual cruelty she had just inflicted. But someone else saw. Someone else always sees. Hidden in the shadowed alcove of a coffee shop across the wide avenue, a pair of eyes, sharp and discerning, had witnessed the entire vignette. They watched as Eleanor, her shoulders slumped but her movements still imbued with a quiet dignity, slowly bent to retrieve her bucket, her thin, gloved hands trembling slightly as she attempted to wipe the cold mud from her face with the back of her wrist. The watcher's jaw tightened, a flicker of something cold and resolute passing through their gaze. This wasn't just an accident. It was a metaphor, a brutal, public baptism in the casual contempt the powerful often hold for the unseen, the unheard, the ones who keep the world turning with their quiet labor. Eleanor Vance, a woman who had raised a family on the meager earnings from jobs like this, who had seen more hardship than Victoria Sterling could comprehend in 1,000 lifetimes, deserved more than this. She deserved respect. She deserved dignity. And in that moment, a silent promise was made by the unseen observer that Victoria Sterling would soon learn a very public lesson about both. What Victoria, in her cocoon of self-importance, couldn't possibly know was that her careless act of malice had set in motion a chain of events that would unravel the meticulously crafted tapestry of her affluent life. This was more than just a splash cleaner. This was the spark that would ignite a firestorm. Before we delve deeper into Eleanor's struggle and Victoria's opulent, oblivious world, tell us in the comments below, have you ever witnessed an act of such blatant disrespect and wished you could do something? What do you think should happen to people who treat others this way? And if you believe that dignity is not determined by wealth, hit that like button and subscribe, because the story of Eleanor Vance and the price Victoria Sterling is about to pay is one you will not want to miss. The repercussions of this single, muddy splash would ripple outwards, touching lives and exposing truths in ways no one, least of all Victoria, could ever anticipate. The city, a sprawling metropolis of glass and steel, was a place of stark contrasts. And today, those contrasts had collided with brutal force on a busy sidewalk, under the indifferent gaze of 1,000 rushing pedestrians, yet piercingly clear to one who had reason to watch and to care. The air was still ringing with the faint echo of Eleanor's gasp, quickly swallowed by the urban cacophony, but the image of her, small and soiled against the backdrop of monumental wealth, was seared into the watcher's memory, a catalyst for what was to come. Eleanor, her heart still thumping a painful rhythm against her ribs, blinked away the grit from her eyes. The cold from the muddy water was already seeping into her bones, a familiar chill that spoke of damp clothes and a long, uncomfortable journey home. She had been on her knees for nearly an hour, the rough bristles of her brush working against the stubborn grime that city life perpetually deposited on the grand entrance of Sterling Industries headquarters. This particular contract, cleaning the exterior steps and brass fittings of several downtown buildings, was new, and she had been determined to make a good impression. Now, Her carefully laundered uniform was a mess, her cleaning supplies scattered, and a deep ache of humiliation settled over her. It wasn't just the physical discomfort. It was the blatant disregard, the casual cruelty that stung the most. She had seen it before, of course, in countless subtle ways throughout her life, but rarely so directly, so dismissively. She straightened her back, a movement that cost her a wince, and began to gather her things. Her face, though smudged with mud, retained its lines of gentle resilience. This was a setback, yes, but Eleanor Vance was a woman built of sterner stuff than Victoria Sterling could ever imagine. Her life had been a testament to quiet endurance, to finding grace in hardship, and to maintaining her integrity when the world offered little in return. She had outlived a beloved husband, raised 2 children who were now successful in their own right, but lived far away, and navigated the precarious landscape of aging with limited means but abundant spirit. Each scrub of the brush, each polished surface, was a small victory against the encroaching tide of irrelevance that society often assigned to the elderly and the working poor. The watcher across the street, however, saw more than just an elderly cleaner. They saw a history, a story, a quiet heroism that deserved not contempt but honor. And as Victoria Sterling's limousine disappeared into the urban sprawl, the watcher made a mental note of the license plate, the company logo discreetly embossed on its side, and the smug, almost imperceptible tilt of the chauffeur's cap. The game, though Victoria was entirely unaware of it, had already begun. The first move had been hers, a careless splash of mud. The next move would be far more calculated, far more impactful, and it would come from a direction she would never suspect. The city held its breath, unaware of the silent drama unfolding, a drama that would soon spill from the shadows into the harsh light of public reckoning. Inside the climate-controlled sanctuary of her limousine, Victoria Sterling barely registered the slight jostle as her driver navigated a puddle. Her attention was consumed by a series of increasingly irate text messages to her personal assistant regarding the suboptimal temperature of her morning latte. The world outside the tinted windows was a blur of lesser beings, a backdrop to her own vastly more important existence. Victoria, heiress to a vast manufacturing fortune and now CEO of Sterling Industries by what many whispered was more a matter of birthright than brilliance, lived in a rarefied atmosphere of yes-men, sycophants, and meticulously curated luxury. Her days were a whirlwind of board meetings where her opinions were rarely challenged, charity galas where her donations bought her fawning admiration, and exclusive shopping sprees where price tags were mere suggestions. Empathy was a foreign concept, a weakness she neither possessed nor tolerated in others. To her, people were either assets to be leveraged or obstacles to be dismissed. The cleaning woman on the steps? If she had noticed her at all, it would have been as a fleeting, inconsequential speck, as insignificant as the grime the woman was paid to remove. Victoria's philosophy was simple. Power and wealth were the only true measures of worth, and those who lacked them deserved their station. Her driver, a man named Arthur who had weathered her tirades for 5 long years, had indeed seen the old woman. He'd winced internally as the wheels sent the cascade of dirty water towards her, but a word of caution to Madame Sterling would have been met with a look of icy disdain, or worse, a lecture on the importance of maintaining her schedule above all else. So, he had remained silent, another small compromise in a life filled with them when serving the whims of the ultra-rich. Across the city, in a quiet, sunlit office overlooking a park, David Vance, Eleanor's son and a highly respected architect, known for his innovative designs and unwavering ethical standards, took a slow sip of his coffee. He hadn't been the one to witness the incident directly. His work often kept him from the daily realities his mother faced, but a seed of unease had been planted. His mother, usually so stoic, had sounded uncharacteristically subdued on their brief morning call, mentioning a bit of a mishap at work, but brushing off his concerns with her typical resilience. Yet, David knew his mother. He knew the subtle inflections in her voice that spoke volumes. This mishap felt different. Unbeknownst to Eleanor, David had, some years ago, discreetly hired a private investigator, not to spy on his mother, but to ensure her safety and well-being as she insisted on maintaining her independence and continuing to work despite his offers of financial support. It was a light touch, a periodic check-in, a safety net she never knew existed. Today, after that call, he made another call, this one to Mr. Henderson, the retired detective who handled these discreet inquiries. Henderson, David's voice was calm but firm. My mother mentioned a mishap at her cleaning job near Sterling Industries this morning. Could you perhaps see if there's any local chatter, any security footage from nearby businesses? Just want to be sure she's all right. Henderson, a man of few words and immense capability, promised to look into it. He knew David's concern was genuine, born not of overbearance, but of deep love and respect for a mother who had sacrificed everything for him. Meanwhile, Victoria Sterling arrived at a power lunch, her earlier latte crisis forgotten, replaced now by her irritation at a rival businesswoman who had dared to wear the same designer dress. She regaled her companions with a cutting anecdote, her laughter sharp and dismissive, completely oblivious to the quiet investigation that had just been set in motion, an investigation that would start as a small ripple, but was destined to become a tidal wave. The city's intricate network of cameras, doormen, and observant citizens often captured more than people realized. Mr. Henderson, with his decades of experience, knew exactly where to look and who to ask. He started with the traffic cameras, then moved to the security feeds of the buildings adjacent to Sterling Industries. It didn't take long. A clear, high-definition clip from a bank's ATM camera, positioned perfectly across the street, showed the entire incident. The Sterling limousine, the deliberate swerve closer to the curb where the puddle lay, the arc of muddy water, and Eleanor's small, retreating figure. Henderson's jaw tightened as he watched. He'd seen a lot in his time, but the casual, almost gleeful cruelty of it, if the slight acceleration into the puddle was any indication, was galling. He saved the footage, made a copy, and then delved into Victoria Sterling. Her public profile was easy enough to find. Philanthropic heiress, ruthless CEO. But Henderson was more interested in the whispers, the off-the-record stories, the patterns of behavior that didn't make it into glossy magazine profiles. And those, he suspected, would paint a very different picture of the woman who thought nothing of soiling an old woman for a moment's convenience or, worse, amusement. The gears were turning, slowly but inexorably, and Victoria Sterling, wrapped in her bubble of entitlement, remained blissfully, dangerously unaware. The universe has a funny way of balancing the scales, and sometimes it uses the most unexpected agents to do so. David waited, a knot of apprehension tightening in his chest, though he projected an air of calm professionalism in his meetings. He trusted Henderson, but the thought of his mother being treated with such disrespect ignited a cold anger within him, an anger he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about mud. It was about the erosion of basic human decency, a societal ailment he often railed against in his own quiet way, through his community-focused architectural projects and his pro bono work for underprivileged neighborhoods. His mother was the epitome of everything he admired: hard-working, honest, and unfailingly kind, even in the face of adversity. To think of someone treating her as less than human was intolerable. Eleanor spent the rest of her morning trying to salvage her workday and her dignity. Her supervisor at the cleaning agency, a harried man named Mr. Peterson, had been sympathetic when she called to explain her soiled uniform, but had also gently reminded her of the importance of maintaining appearances, especially with new, high-profile clients like Sterling Industries. These types, Mrs. Vance, he'd said with a sigh, they notice everything. Eleanor knew he meant well, but his words added another layer to her discomfort. She managed to clean herself up as best she could in the cramped, chilly restroom of a nearby coffee shop, dabbing at the mud stains with rough paper towels and lukewarm water. Her spare apron, thankfully, was clean, though her shoes and stockings remained damp and uncomfortable. The physical chill was one thing. The chill in her heart was another. She thought of her late husband, Arthur, a man whose laughter could fill a room and whose belief in her had been a constant source of strength. He would have been outraged, would have wanted to march right into that grand building and demand an apology. Eleanor, however, was not one for confrontations. Her strength lay in resilience, in quiet perseverance. Yet, as she returned to her duties, the memory of the black limousine and the unseen face behind its tinted windows replayed in her mind. It wasn't anger she felt, not primarily, but a profound sadness, a weariness at the casual cruelty the world so often displayed. Later that afternoon, Victoria Sterling, having successfully navigated her power lunch and demolished her rival's confidence with a few well-placed barbs, decided on an impromptu shopping trip. As she swept into an exclusive boutique, her personal assistant trailing nervously behind her laden with bags from previous conquests, she nearly collided with a sales assistant who was arranging a display. "Watch where you're going, you clumsy oaf," Victoria snapped, not even bothering to see if the young woman was all right. The assistant, pale and flustered, stammered an apology, though the fault had clearly been Victoria's. This small, unremarkable display of arrogance was just another Tuesday for Victoria, but it was becoming part of a pattern that Mr. Henderson was meticulously piecing together. He had spoken to a few disgruntled former employees of Sterling Industries, doormen from buildings Victoria frequented, even a caterer who had worked one of her extravagant parties. The stories, though varied in their specifics, painted a consistent picture. Victoria Sterling was a woman who believed the rules didn't apply to her, who treated service staff with contempt, and who seemed to derive a perverse pleasure from exercising her power over those she considered insignificant. One former chauffeur, fired for being 5 minutes late due to a traffic accident he hadn't caused, recounted how Victoria had made him wait in the rain for an hour while she finished a leisurely brunch, simply to teach him a lesson. Another story involved her publicly berating a young waiter until he cried because he'd brought her the wrong brand of sparkling water. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a modus operandi. Henderson compiled his findings, including the crystal-clear footage of the mudsplashing, into a concise report and sent it to David. He knew the architect well enough to understand that David Vance was not a man who would let such an injustice against his mother stand, but he also knew David was not impulsive. Whatever action he took would be thoughtful, strategic, and devastatingly effective. David received the file late that evening. He opened it in the quiet solitude of his study, the city lights twinkling like distant, indifferent stars outside his window. He watched the video clip once, then twice, then a third time. Each viewing solidified the cold, hard knot of anger in his chest. Seeing his mother, so small and vulnerable, being doused with muddy water by that indifferent behemoth of a car, then seeing her straighten up with that unbreakable dignity, it was almost too much to bear. He read through Henderson's supplementary notes, the litany of petty cruelties and abuses of power attributed to Victoria Sterling. A picture formed in his mind, not just of an arrogant woman, but of a deeply flawed individual whose wealth had insulated her from the basic tenets of human decency. His mother had always taught him that true strength wasn't about power over others, but power over oneself, self-control, integrity, compassion. Victoria Sterling possessed none of these. The desire for immediate, furious confrontation was strong, but David quelled it. A shouting match, a demand for an apology that would achieve little. Victoria would dismiss him as easily as she had dismissed his mother. No, this required something more. This required a lesson, not just a reprimand. A lesson that would resonate not just with Victoria, but with everyone in her orbit. A lesson about consequences, about the invisible threads of humanity that connect us all, and about the profound truth that sometimes the most unassuming people possess the greatest power, the power of character. His mind began to work, sifting through possibilities. His architect's brain, accustomed to designing complex structures, now focused on designing a different kind of edifice, a perfectly constructed moment of reckoning. He knew Victoria's world. He knew the currency she valued, status, public image, the admiration of her peers. And it was in that world, using that currency, that she would be made to pay. The first inklings of a plan began to form, intricate and precise. He would need allies, resources, and impeccable timing. But most of all, he would need his mother's unwitting cooperation, for at the heart of his plan was the simple, unassailable truth of her quiet, unyielding dignity. He thought of the upcoming annual city philanthropy ball, a major event in their city's social calendar, an event Victoria Sterling never missed, often using it as a platform to burnish her public image. It was a perfect stage. The question now was how to set it. The revelation of David's connection to Eleanor Vance, the humble cleaning woman, would have sent shockwaves through the city's elite circles. But for now, it remained his closely guarded secret, the hidden fulcrum upon which his plan would pivot. His mother, Eleanor, had indeed sacrificed immensely for him, and his sister, Clara, who was now a renowned pediatrician working with Doctors Without Borders in a remote corner of the world. After their father's early death from a sudden illness, Eleanor had worked multiple jobs, from waitressing to cleaning offices, her hands often raw, her body weary, but her spirit undimmed. She had instilled in her children the values of hard work, integrity, and compassion above all else, teaching them that a person's worth was measured not by their bank balance, but by the content of their character. David remembered countless nights when she would come home late, smelling of industrial cleaner and cheap diner coffee, yet still find the energy to help him with his homework, her voice soft and encouraging, her belief in his potential unwavering. She had foregone new clothes, simple pleasures, and her own dreams so that he could attend the best schools, pursue his passion for architecture, and build a life she could only have dreamed of for herself. Now, seeing her subjected to such casual, unthinking cruelty by someone like Victoria Sterling, a woman who had inherited everything and earned nothing of true value, filled David with a protective fury that was almost primal. He spent the next few days meticulously researching Victoria Sterling, not just her public persona, but her vulnerabilities, her aspirations, her fears. He discovered her desperate desire to be seen not just as a wealthy heiress, but as a respected business leader and philanthropist, a pillar of the community. She was particularly keen on winning the prestigious Civic Innovator of the Year award, to be presented at the upcoming City Philanthropy Ball. The award, sponsored by a consortium of the city's most influential foundations, was a significant mark of prestige, and Victoria had been lobbying hard for it, her company making a series of high-profile, though David suspected, superficial, donations to various causes. This was his opening. David, through his own architectural firm's philanthropic arm and his extensive network, had connections to several of the foundations on the award committee. He began to make discreet inquiries, subtly planting seeds of doubt about Victoria's suitability, not through direct accusations, but by highlighting the importance of character, integrity, and genuine community impact, qualities starkly absent in the private portrait Henderson had painted of her. He then reached out to a few trusted contacts in the media, journalists known for their investigative rigor and their willingness to expose hypocrisy among the powerful. He didn't give them the full story yet, just enough to pique their interest, hinting at a significant revelation to come at the philanthropy ball concerning one of the city's most prominent figures. The stage was being set, piece by painstaking piece. His plan was multi-layered. It wasn't just about publicly shaming Victoria. It was about orchestrating a situation where her own arrogance and dismissiveness would be her undoing, witnessed by the very people whose approval she craved. He also needed to involve his mother, but in a way that wouldn't cause her further distress. He decided to approach the organizers of the philanthropy ball with a proposal to honor an unsung hero of the city, an ordinary citizen whose quiet dedication and hard work contributed significantly to the community, often without recognition. He subtly guided them towards the idea of selecting someone from the city's essential workforce, someone like a cleaner, a maintenance worker, a public transport driver. He knew Eleanor would never seek such recognition, but if she were chosen, she would accept with her usual quiet grace. He submitted a carefully worded, anonymous nomination for Eleanor, highlighting her decades of diligent service, her resilience, and her unwavering kindness, supported by testimonials he discreetly gathered from people whose lives she had touched in small but meaningful ways. Former colleagues, neighbors, even the owner of the small bakery where she bought her bread, who spoke of her unfailing cheerfulness. The committee, charmed by the genuine warmth of the nomination and looking for a way to make the usually staid awards ceremony more relatable, was intrigued. As the date of the ball approached, David finalized the last details. He arranged for a professional videographer, ostensibly part of the event's official media team, but secretly briefed by him, to focus on Victoria Sterling at key moments. He also ensured that Mr. Henderson, looking dapper in a rented tuxedo, would be present, carrying a small, encrypted hard drive containing the ATM footage and his compiled report. David felt a pang of guilt for the deception involved, even towards his mother, but his resolve was firm. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about rebalancing scales that had been unfairly tipped for far too long. Victoria Sterling, meanwhile, was consumed with her campaign for the Civic Innovator Award. She increased her charitable donations, gave a series of carefully stage-managed interviews about her commitment to corporate social responsibility, and rehearsed her acceptance speech. She was confident the award was hers. The thought that her carefully constructed public image was about to be publicly dismantled by the son of a woman she wouldn't even recognize if she passed her on the street was beyond her wildest imaginings. The hunter, as the narrator might say, was indeed about to become the hunted, ensnared in a trap built not of steel and stone, but of her own hubris and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. The city hummed with anticipation for the philanthropy ball, unaware of the simmering drama that was about to unfold beneath its glittering chandeliers. Eleanor, to her utter astonishment, had been informed a week prior that she was to be honored with the Unsung Hero Award. Her initial reaction was a flustered refusal. "Oh, goodness me, there must be some mistake. I just do my job." But David, with gentle persuasion and by emphasizing how much it would mean to him and Clara, convinced her to accept. He helped her pick out a simple but elegant dress, a soft lavender that complemented her silver hair, and arranged for a car to pick her up. She was nervous, completely out of her element, but also secretly touched by the unexpected recognition. The grand ballroom of the City Central Hotel was a dazzling spectacle of crystal, silk, and an almost tangible buzz of self-importance. Waiters in crisp uniforms glided through the throngs of bejeweled women and men in bespoke tuxedos, balancing trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Victoria Sterling, resplendent in a crimson gown that demanded attention, held court near the elaborate ice sculpture, her laughter a little too loud, her gestures a little too expansive. She was in her element, soaking up the admiration, utterly convinced that the night belonged to her, that the Civic Innovator of the Year award was a mere formality. She barely registered the arrival of a quiet, elderly woman in a lavender dress, who was being discreetly escorted to a table near the side by a young event organizer. Eleanor Vance, looking around with wide, slightly overwhelmed eyes, felt like a sparrow in a peacock enclosure. She clutched her small handbag, her heart fluttering with a mixture of nerves and a quiet, humble pride. David, looking distinguished in his tuxedo, mingled seamlessly, exchanging pleasantries with acquaintances, his demeanor calm and affable, giving no hint of the storm he was about to unleash. He caught his mother's eye across the room and gave her a reassuring smile. He had briefed the event MC, a well-known local television personality named Brenda Riley, on the revised order of presentations. The Unsung Hero Award would be presented just before the Civic Innovator of the Year. As the guests settled at their tables, the lights dimmed, and Brenda Riley stepped onto the stage, her voice warm and engaging. She spoke of the importance of philanthropy, of community, of recognizing those who make a difference. Then, she moved to the first special presentation of the evening. "Tonight," Brenda announced, her voice taking on a more reverent tone, "we have a distinct honor of recognizing someone who represents the true heart of our city. An individual whose tireless dedication, quiet dignity, and unwavering kindness often go unnoticed, yet whose contribution is immeasurable. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in celebrating this year's recipient of the Unsung Hero of the City Award, Mrs. Eleanor Vance. A polite smattering of applause rippled through the room as a spotlight found Eleanor. Many in the audience exchanged curious glances, wondering who this unassuming woman was. Eleanor, her cheeks flushed, slowly made her way to the stage, David discreetly moving to her side to offer a supportive arm. Victoria Sterling, momentarily distracted from schmoozing a potential business partner, glanced towards the stage with mild disinterest. An old cleaning woman, she thought dismissively. How quaint. Her attention quickly returned to her conversation, missing the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere as Eleanor reached the podium. Eleanor, her voice trembling slightly but clear, gave a short, heartfelt speech. She thanked the committee, spoke of the importance of all work, no matter how humble, and dedicated the award to all the unseen people who keep the city running. Her genuine humility and quiet eloquence charmed the audience, and the applause this time was warmer, more sustained. As Eleanor, visibly moved, was escorted back to her seat, David stepped forward to the microphone Brenda Riley offered him, ostensibly to say a few words about the Unsung Hero initiative his firm supported. "Thank you, Brenda," he began, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable authority that made people listen. "Mrs. Vance, my mother, truly embodies the spirit of this award. She has taught me that dignity, integrity, and compassion are the true measures of a person's worth, qualities that, unfortunately, are not always universally practiced, even by those in positions of power and influence in our city." A slight murmur went through the crowd. Victoria Sterling, sensing a shift in tone, finally paid closer attention, a frown creasing her perfectly made-up forehead. "Indeed," David continued, his gaze slowly sweeping across the room before landing, with chilling precision, on Victoria. "Some individuals believe their wealth or status places them above common decency. They might, for instance, feel entitled to carelessly endanger and humiliate someone like Eleanor Vance, someone they deem insignificant, perhaps by recklessly splashing her with muddy water from their limousine and driving off without a second thought, leaving her cold, soiled, and shaken, simply because she was a cleaner on the steps of their grand office building." The ballroom fell into a stunned, almost absolute silence. Every eye in the room, including those of the now very alert media contingent, swiveled towards Victoria Sterling. The air crackled with tension. Victoria's face, moments before flushed with confident anticipation, had gone deathly pale beneath her expensive makeup. The ice sculpture behind her seemed to drip a little faster. David paused, letting his words hang heavy in the air. "Such an incident," he said, his voice now laced with a steely edge, "occurred just a few weeks ago, and we have the footage." On cue, the large screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying the event logo, flickered and then came to life with crystal-clear, undeniable video. The black Sterling Industries limousine, the swerve, the arc of muddy water, and Eleanor, small and defenseless, being drenched. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. The videographer David had hired zoomed in on Victoria's horrified, then rapidly reddening, face. The trap had been sprung. Her own arrogance, her own casual cruelty, was now playing out for the entire city's elite to witness. The carefully constructed facade of Victoria Sterling, philanthropist and community pillar, was shattering in real time. The silence in the grand ballroom was no longer just stunned. It was thick with a mixture of shock, embarrassment for those associated with Victoria, and a dawning, horrified understanding. Victoria Sterling sat frozen, her crimson gown suddenly feeling like a shroud. The elegantly coiffed heads at her table had subtly turned away, as if her proximity might be contagious. The crystal-clear video played on, a silent, damning indictment. It showed Eleanor's dignified, pained reaction, her slow, trembling efforts to clean herself. It was a stark, brutal contrast to the opulent surroundings and the self-congratulatory atmosphere of the philanthropy ball. David Vance let the footage play for a full 30 seconds before signaling for it to stop. The image of Eleanor, wiping mud from her spectacles, lingered on the screens. "This isn't just about my mother." David's voice resonated through the hushed room, calm but with an undercurrent of controlled fury. "This is about a pattern of behavior, a pattern of arrogance, of contempt, of treating hard-working, decent people as if they're invisible, as if their dignity doesn't matter." He gestured towards Mr. Henderson, who stood discreetly near the media tables. "We have compiled numerous accounts, statements from former employees, service staff, even business associates, detailing a consistent disregard for common decency, a history of belittling and humiliating those perceived to be of a lower status. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a reflection of character." Victoria finally found her voice, a shrill, defensive cry that tore through the silence. "This is outrageous. A setup. That video could be anything. How dare you tarnish my name with these lies?" Her voice cracked, her carefully maintained composure crumbling. She looked around wildly for support, but saw only averted gazes or expressions of thinly veiled disgust. The journalists, however, were scribbling furiously, their cameras flashing, capturing every nuance of her public meltdown. Brenda Riley, the MC, looking profoundly uncomfortable but also professionally intrigued, stepped forward. "Mr. Vance, these are very serious allegations. Ms. Sterling, do you have a response to the specific incident shown in the video?" Victoria spluttered. It was an accident. My driver. I didn't even see her. This is a malicious attack orchestrated by this nobody." She pointed a trembling, bejeweled finger at David, then at Eleanor, who sat watching with a pained, sorrowful expression. Eleanor had not wanted this public spectacle. Seeing her son defend her so fiercely filled her with a fierce, protective love, but the ugliness of it all, Victoria's raw, exposed cruelty, saddened her deeply. David remained impassive. "An accident, Miss Sterling? Our investigation, including analysis of the vehicle's telemetry, which shows a distinct acceleration and swerve towards the curb where the puddle was largest, suggests otherwise. As does your failure to stop to check on the elderly woman you had just doused with freezing, filthy water on a cold morning. As for being a nobody," his voice dropped, taking on a dangerous edge, "Eleanor Vance is my mother. She is a woman of more integrity, compassion, and true worth in her little finger than you have displayed in your entire privileged life." Another collective gasp. The connection was now explicit. The motive for David's actions laid bare. The unknown watcher was no longer unknown. He was the son of the victim, a respected architect, a man with the means and the intelligence to orchestrate this perfectly timed downfall. The whispers started then, spreading like wildfire. Her son? David Vance. He planned this whole thing. Serve her right. I always said she was a viper. Victoria looked as if she had been physically struck. Her face contorted with a mixture of fury and dawning panic. She tried to stand, to flee, but her legs seemed unwilling to obey. Her carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of inherited wealth and cultivated fear, was imploding. The chair of the Civic Innovator Award Committee, a stern-faced elderly gentleman who was also the head of the city's oldest charitable foundation, rose slowly from his table. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but carried immense weight. "In light of these disturbing revelations," he said, his gaze fixed on Victoria, "the committee will, of course, be reconvening to reconsider the nominations for the Civic Innovator of the Year award. Integrity and character are paramount." That was the death knell. The award, the symbol of the public respect Victoria craved so desperately, was slipping from her grasp, and with it, her reputation. The edifice of her public image, so carefully maintained, so ruthlessly protected, was now a pile of rubble, exposed for all to see. The cameras continued to flash, capturing the raw, unedited reality of a queen dethroned, not by a rival, but by her own callousness and the quiet, determined love of a son for his mother. The silence that followed the committee chair's pronouncement was heavier than any sound. Victoria Sterling, for the first time in her adult life, looked truly small, stripped of her power, her arrogance now appearing as a pathetic, hollow shield. The humiliation was complete, a public spectacle of her own making, facilitated by the son of the woman she had so carelessly wronged. The immediate aftermath of the philanthropy ball was a maelstrom of activity. Victoria Sterling, somehow managing to gather the tattered remnants of her composure, was whisked away by her now visibly shaken personal assistant, enduring a gauntlet of flashing cameras and shouted questions from the press. The footage of her public announcement, the damning ATM video, and David Vance's calm, incisive accusations were already viral before the last champagne flute was cleared from the ballroom. Her name, once a symbol of untouchable wealth and power, became an overnight synonym for arrogance and cruelty. The carefully curated articles praising her business acumen and philanthropic endeavors were swiftly buried under an avalanche of stories detailing her public disgrace. Social media exploded with hashtags like #VictoriaSterlingExposed and #MuddyJustice, with thousands sharing the video and recounting their own, previously unheard, stories of her entitled behavior. The Civic Innovator of the Year award, needless to say, went to someone else, a dedicated community doctor known for her work in underserved neighborhoods. Victoria's name was quietly removed from consideration, a footnote in the annals of public shaming. For Eleanor Vance, the evening had been a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The initial shock of the public confrontation, the pain of seeing Victoria's cruelty laid bare, and the fierce, overwhelming pride in her son's articulate and powerful defense of her dignity. As David escorted her home, away from the glare of the media and the excited chatter, she was quiet. "You didn't have to do all that, David," she finally whispered, her hand resting on his arm. "She wasn't worth it." David squeezed her hand gently. "You are, Mom," he said simply. "You are worth everything." And in that moment, Eleanor understood. This wasn't just about punishing Victoria. It was about affirming her own worth, a worth that had been so casually trampled upon. In the days that followed, Victoria's world continued to unravel. Several high-profile board members of Sterling Industries, embarrassed by the scandal and fearing damage to their own reputations, demanded an emergency meeting. Rumors circulated that they were pushing for her resignation as CEO. Business deals that had been on the verge of closing were suddenly put on hold, potential partners citing reputational concerns. The exclusive social clubs she frequented suddenly found their membership lists under review. Invitations to coveted events dried up. Her phone, once constantly ringing with calls from influential people, fell eerily silent, or worse, brought calls from former allies now distancing themselves. Her attempts at damage control were disastrous. A hastily arranged press conference, where she attempted a tearful, unconvincing apology, was widely panned as insincere and self-serving. She blamed her driver, then stress, then the unfairness of the media, never truly acknowledging the core issue, her own behavior. Each attempt to salvage her image only dug her deeper into the hole. David Vance, meanwhile, handled the ensuing media attention with quiet dignity. He gave a few select interviews, always steering the conversation back to the broader issues of respect, dignity for all workers, and the responsibilities that come with wealth and power. He emphasized that his actions were not born of malice, but of a desire to see justice for his mother and to hold accountable those who believe themselves immune to common decency. He also announced that his firm would be establishing a foundation in Eleanor's name to provide support and advocacy for elderly and low-income workers facing workplace discrimination or abuse. The Eleanor Vance Dignity Fund received an outpouring of public support and donations. Eleanor herself, uncomfortable with the sudden limelight, retreated to the quiet comfort of her small apartment, though she was deeply touched by the letters and messages of support that flooded in. People shared their own stories of being belittled or disrespected, finding a sense of solidarity in her experience. She received an unexpected call from the cleaning agency supervisor, Mr. Peterson, who apologized profusely for not having done more to protect her and offered her a promotion to a training role, if she wished, where she could impart her meticulous standards and, more importantly, her quiet strength to new employees. Victoria's carefully constructed empire of arrogance was indeed crumbling, not with a loud explosion, but with the slow, inexorable erosion of her power base, her social standing, and her self-delusion. The mud she had so carelessly splashed had come back to coat her own life, and this time there was no easy way to wash it clean. The lesson was being learned, not just by Victoria, but by many in her circle who were now looking over their own shoulders, wondering if their own past indiscretions might one day be brought into the harsh light of public scrutiny. The city was watching, and for once, it seemed, the scales of justice were tipping, however slowly, towards those who had been too long ignored. The ripple effects of Victoria Sterling's public humiliation extended far beyond her personal and professional life, sparking a citywide conversation about class divides, workplace dignity, and the often unseen labor that keeps society functioning. Newspapers ran editorials, talk shows buzzed with debates, and community forums were organized to discuss the issues David Vance had so powerfully brought to light. The story of the cleaning granny and the arrogant millionaire became a modern-day parable, a cautionary tale about the consequences of hubris and the quiet power of integrity. Several other individuals, emboldened by David's actions and the public support for Eleanor, began to come forward with their own stories of mistreatment at the hands of Victoria Sterling or within the corporate culture of Sterling Industries. A former executive assistant detailed a pattern of verbal abuse and impossible demands. A junior analyst spoke of being publicly humiliated in a board meeting for a minor error. These accounts, shared anonymously at first and then with increasing courage, painted an even darker picture of Victoria's reign, suggesting her casual cruelty was not just a personal failing but a management style. Sterling Industries' board of directors, facing mounting pressure from shareholders, activist groups, and now a potential class action lawsuit from former employees, found themselves in an untenable position. The company's stock price had taken a noticeable dip, and several major clients were threatening to pull their contracts unless significant changes were made at the leadership level. The reputational concerns David had foreseen were materializing with alarming speed. Victoria, increasingly isolated and paranoid, lashed out at her remaining staff, blaming everyone but herself for her predicament. Her attempts to use her wealth and connections to suppress the negative press or intimidate her critics only backfired, making her appear even more out of touch and vindictive. Even her oldest allies, those who had benefited from her family's influence for decades, began to create distance, their loyalty proving as shallow as her own empathy. Eleanor Vance, in stark contrast, found herself an unintentional symbol of quiet resilience. Flowers, cards, and small gifts arrived at her apartment from strangers who had been moved by her story. A local community center invited her to speak to a group of young people about the importance of hard work and self-respect. Initially hesitant, she eventually agreed, and her simple, heartfelt words resonated deeply. She spoke not of bitterness or revenge, but of the importance of kindness, of seeing the humanity in everyone, and of finding strength in adversity. Her quiet dignity in the face of such public vindication was, in itself, a powerful statement. The Eleanor Vance Dignity Fund, launched by David's firm, rapidly gained momentum. Contributions poured in, not just from wealthy philanthropists who may have been trying to subtly distance themselves from the Victoria Sterling brand of arrogance, but also from ordinary citizens. Small donations from people who understood, firsthand, the struggles Eleanor represented. The fund's first initiatives focused on providing legal aid for low-wage workers facing exploitation and establishing workshops on workplace rights and self-advocacy. David, while pleased with the public response and the positive changes being sparked, remained focused on ensuring that the consequences for Victoria were not merely fleeting. He knew that public memory could be short and that true accountability required more than just a few weeks of bad press. He worked quietly with the legal teams representing the former employees of Sterling Industries, providing them with the meticulously gathered evidence from Mr. Henderson's investigation, ensuring they had the strongest possible case. The systemic echoes were becoming louder. Other companies in the city began to quietly review their own codes of conduct and their treatment of lower-level employees, suddenly aware that the old ways of doing business, where casual disrespect was tolerated, might no longer be acceptable. The philanthropy ball incident had served as a wake-up call, a stark reminder that in an age of ubiquitous cameras and instant social media, no act of cruelty, no matter how seemingly minor, was truly private. The narrative was shifting from the personal drama of one woman's downfall to a broader societal reckoning. It was no longer just about Victoria Sterling. It was about the countless other Victorias who moved through the world with a similar sense of entitlement, and the countless Eleanors who deserved to be treated with fundamental human respect. The mud splash had, in a strange way, cleansed a little bit of the city's conscience, forcing it to confront an uncomfortable truth about itself. And as the story continued to unfold, it became clear that this was not just an end, but a beginning, the beginning of a much larger and much-needed conversation. The day of reckoning for Victoria Sterling arrived not with a dramatic courtroom showdown, but with the quiet, inexorable pressure of consequence. Facing overwhelming evidence of a hostile work environment, numerous credible lawsuits from former and current employees, and the complete collapse of her public image, the board of Sterling Industries finally acted. In a terse press release, they announced Victoria Sterling's immediate and permanent resignation as CEO and from the board of directors. The statement spoke of a new direction for the company, emphasizing a commitment to ethical leadership and employee welfare. The subtext was clear. The Victoria Sterling era was over. Her severance package, though substantial by any ordinary measure, was rumored to be significantly less than she had expected, a final, quiet rebuke from the institution her family had built. Stripped of her power and her public platform, Victoria retreated from the public eye, her once glittering social life reduced to a small circle of equally tarnished acquaintances. The grand mansion felt less like a palace and more like a gilded cage. The silence, once a symbol of her exclusive domain, now echoed with the ghosts of her own arrogance. She would never truly understand the depth of her failings, perhaps forever blaming others for her downfall, but the world she had once so casually dominated had irrevocably changed around her. Eleanor Vance, when she heard the news of Victoria's resignation, felt a quiet sense of closure, but no triumph. Her life continued much as it had before, filled with the simple rhythms of work, her small garden, and her weekly calls with David and Clara. She politely declined the training supervisor role at the cleaning agency, preferring the familiar solitude of her early morning rounds. But she did agree to occasionally mentor new hires, sharing her wisdom and her gentle spirit. She found a particular joy in the progress of the Dignity Fund established in her name, often attending its small community events, her presence a quiet inspiration. David watched his mother, her resilience, her unwavering grace, and knew that he had done the right thing. His actions had been born of a son's love and a deep-seated belief in justice, but they had also been a testament to the values Eleanor had instilled in him. He knew that one act of public accountability wouldn't eradicate arrogance or class prejudice, but had undeniably sent a message, a warning that decency and respect were not optional, and that even the most powerful could be held to account. He reflected on the nature of true wealth. Victoria Sterling had possessed all the material trappings of it, yet she had been impoverished in spirit, in empathy, in character. His mother, with her modest apartment and her worn cleaning bucket, possessed an abundance of the riches that truly mattered: integrity, kindness, and the deep, abiding love of her family. The story of Eleanor and Victoria became a touchstone in the city. It was taught in business ethics classes, discussed in community groups, and served as a reminder that every individual, regardless of their job title or social standing, deserves to be treated with dignity. The ATM footage, once a symbol of casual cruelty, was now a symbol of empowerment. a reminder that even the smallest, most overlooked moments could have profound consequences. Mr. Henderson, enjoying a quiet retirement funded in part by a generous consulting fee from David for his invaluable assistance, sometimes saw Eleanor in her neighborhood coffee shop. They would exchange a polite nod, two people who understood, without words, the strange, significant chapter they had shared. The city, in its own way, had learned a lesson. The change was subtle, perhaps, not a revolution, but an evolution, a slight increase in courtesy towards service staff, a greater awareness of the unseen work that underpins urban life, a little less tolerance for overt displays of entitlement. The legacy of that muddy splash was not just one woman's downfall, but a gentle, persistent nudge towards a more compassionate, more respectful society. And for Eleanor Vance, life went on, her days marked by the quiet dignity of her labor, her heart filled with the love of her children, and a certain knowledge that her worth had never been defined by the world's estimation, but by the strength and grace she carried within. The richest person in this story was not the one in the limousine, but the one on the steps, her spirit unsoiled, her value immeasurable. The saga of Eleanor Vance and Victoria Sterling, which began with a contemptuous splash of muddy water, ultimately served as a powerful and widely disseminated lesson on the intrinsic value of human dignity and the often delayed but inevitable arrival of consequences for unchecked arrogance. The events resonated far beyond the confines of their city, becoming a viral narrative that prompted introspection and discussion on a national level about how society treats its most vulnerable and essential workers. Victoria Sterling, once a titan of industry and a queen of the social scene, found her world irrevocably diminished. The loss of her CEO position was just the beginning. Many of her so-called friends, who had basked in her reflected glory, vanished like morning mist once her star began to fall. The invitations ceased, the fawning calls stopped, and she was left with the hollow echo of her former influence. Legal battles from disgruntled former employees and shareholder lawsuits plagued Sterling Industries for years, a constant, expensive reminder of her disastrous tenure. While she retained a significant portion of her inherited wealth, the currency she truly valued, public admiration and unquestioned power, was gone forever. She became a recluse, a cautionary tale whispered about in the very circles she once dominated. Her attempts to rebrand herself through carefully orchestrated charitable donations were met with cynicism, the public memory of her humiliation at the philanthropy ball proving stubbornly persistent. She never truly grasped the lesson, continuing to believe herself a victim of a malicious plot rather than the architect of her own downfall. This lack of self-awareness was perhaps her greatest tragedy, a prison of her own making more confining than any physical one. Eleanor Vance, on the other hand, flourished in her own quiet way. The Unsung Hero Award, initially a source of slight embarrassment, became a symbol of the respect she had earned through a lifetime of quiet diligence. She continued her cleaning work, not out of necessity, as David and Clara had long offered to support her fully, but out of a sense of purpose and routine that she cherished. However, her interactions changed. People recognized her, the woman from the news, the dignity granny, as one affectionate blogger had dubbed her. They greeted her with smiles, with small acts of kindness, a cup of coffee offered on a cold morning, a heartfelt thank you for her work. These gestures, small as they were a testament to the impact her story had made. The Eleanor Vance Dignity Fund grew into a significant force for good, advocating for fair wages, better working conditions, and legal protections for low-income and elderly workers across the state. David, while continuing his successful architectural career, dedicated a considerable amount of his time to overseeing the fund, ensuring it remained true to his mother's spirit of compassion and integrity. He often said that this was the most important structure he would ever help build. The most profound lesson from this entire episode was perhaps the simplest, that every action has a reaction, and that treating others with contempt, regardless of their perceived station in life, is a debt that will eventually be called due. It highlighted the often invisible labor that underpins our society and the critical need to afford respect and dignity to those who perform it. It also systemic change, successfully lobbying for local ordinances that strengthen protections for low-wage workers, mandated clearer codes of conduct for businesses, and established easier channels for reporting workplace abuse. They launched educational programs aimed at businesses, teaching the tangible benefits of a respectful and ethical workplace culture, arguing that treating employees well was not just morally right, but also good for the bottom line. The Unsung Hero Award, which Eleanor had so humbly accepted, gained new prestige. Each year, the city eagerly anticipated the announcement, celebrating individuals whose contributions, like Eleanor's, often went unrecognized but were vital to the community's well-being. It became a powerful counter-narrative to the celebrity-obsessed culture, highlighting the extraordinary in the ordinary. David often reflected on the events. He had not sought to destroy Victoria Sterling, but to hold her accountable and, in doing so, to defend his mother's honor and shine a light on a pervasive societal issue. He understood that true justice wasn't just about punishment, but about restoration and learning. While Victoria herself might never have learned the lesson, the city, in many ways, had. The story's enduring power lay in its relatability. Everyone knew in Eleanor, a hard-working, decent person who deserved respect, and many, unfortunately, had encountered a Victoria, someone whose entitlement led them to mistreat others. The public nature of Victoria's reckoning provided a catharsis, a sense that sometimes, just sometimes, the scales do balance. Years later, young journalists writing retrospective pieces on moments that shaped the city would invariably include the story of the mud-splashed cleaner and the philanthropy ball. It became a symbol of a turning point, a moment when the city was forced to look at itself and ask difficult questions about the values it truly upheld. Eleanor Vance lived out her remaining years in peace and quiet dignity, surrounded by the love of her children and grandchildren, and the respect of a community that had come to see her as a symbol of something good and true. Her legacy was not in buildings or fortunes, but in the countless lives touched by her story and the fund established in her name. It was a legacy of kindness, resilience, and the quiet, unshakable power of a life lived with integrity. And so, the tale concludes, not with a grand, sweeping pronouncement, but with a quiet understanding. Treat every person you encounter as if their story matters, because it does. Treat them as if they have a powerful, loving son or daughter watching, because they might. But most importantly, treat them with dignity simply because they are human, and that, in itself, is reason enough. The ripples from that one muddy splash continue to spread, washing away a little bit of cynicism, and leaving behind a renewed belief in the possibility of justice and the enduring importance of simple human decency. The final chapters of this compelling saga affirm timeless truths about human nature, societal structures, and the often unseen consequences of our daily interactions. Victoria Sterling's spectacular and public unraveling was not merely the result of a single, ill-conceived act of splashing mud on Eleanor Vance. Rather, that incident served as the catalyst, the visible tip of an iceberg of sustained arrogance and disdain that characterized her entire approach to those she deemed beneath her. Her downfall illustrated with stark clarity that a reputation built on fear and inherited status, rather than genuine respect and earned merit, is a fragile edifice, easily toppled when subjected to the light of public scrutiny and the weight of collective disapproval. The swiftness with which her allies deserted her and her empire of influence crumbled underscored the transactional nature of relationships based on power rather than principle. In essence, Victoria became a victim of the very system of superficiality and conditional loyalty that she herself had perpetuated. Her inability to offer a sincere apology, her persistent attempts to shift blame, only further cemented public perception of her as unrepentant and irredeemable, sealing her fate as a social pariah, a wealthy outcast in a city that no longer tolerated her brand of overt elitism. Conversely, Eleanor Vance's story blossomed into an enduring symbol of the quiet power of integrity and the profound impact of a life lived with unassuming grace. She never sought the spotlight, nor did she desire retribution. Her vindication came not from Victoria's ruin, but from the affirmation of her own inherent worth and the outpouring of support and respect she received from her community and beyond. The Eleanor Vance Dignity Fund became her most lasting public legacy, a testament to the idea that one person's experience of injustice, when bravely confronted and shared, can ignite a movement for broader societal change. The fund's work in advocating for vulnerable workers, promoting ethical workplace practices, and fostering a culture of respect provided tangible, ongoing benefits to countless individuals, transforming a personal insult into a public good. David Vance's role in this drama was pivotal. He exemplified how focused intelligence, strategic planning, and a deep-seated moral conviction can effectively challenge entrenched power. His actions were not those of a vigilante seeking mere revenge, but of a devoted son and a principled citizen determined to correct a profound wrong and, in doing so, to elevate a larger conversation about social responsibility. He understood that true justice requires not only holding wrongdoers accountable, but also fostering an environment where such wrongs are less likely to occur in the future. The broader societal impact of the incident was perhaps its most significant outcome. It served as a powerful, real-world case study on the consequences of dehumanizing others and the importance of empathy in all human interactions. The Eleanor Steps movement, though simple, was a beautiful, organic expression of a community's desire to acknowledge and appreciate the often invisible contributions of its members. It fostered a sense of shared humanity, a recognition that the well-being of the city depended on the efforts of everyone, from the CEO in the penthouse to the cleaner on the steps. This story, therefore, transcends a simple narrative of good versus evil or rich versus poor. It delves into the complexities of human character, the corrosive nature of unchecked privilege, and the enduring strength found in humility, hard work, and compassion. It reminds us that while systems of power and influence may seem unassailable, they're ultimately composed of individuals, and individuals are accountable for their actions. The legacy of Eleanor Vance and Victoria Sterling is a dual one, a warning against the perils of arrogance and a testament to the enduring power of dignity. It teaches us that every interaction is an opportunity to either build up or tear down, to connect or to alienate. And it powerfully affirms that in the grand tapestry of life, it is not the noise of our pronouncements or the gleam of our possessions that define us, but the quiet integrity of our actions and the genuine respect we show to our fellow human beings. The mud may have long since dried, but the lessons from that fateful morning continue to resonate, a quiet but persistent call to our better selves. The enduring resonance of the clash between Eleanor Vance's quiet dignity and Victoria Sterling's blatant arrogance serves as a potent cultural touchstone, a narrative that continues to inform discussions on social equity, corporate ethics, and the fundamental tenets of human respect long after the headlines faded. It's a story that starkly highlights the difference between perceived power, often propped up by wealth and status, and true strength, which emanates from character and resilience. Victoria Sterling's ultimate fate, a descent into well-heeled obscurity, her name a byword for entitled cruelty, became a modern parable. It wasn't just the loss of her position or social standing that defined her defeat. It was her failure to comprehend the lesson, her inability to transcend her own ego and recognize the humanity of others. This profound lack of introspection ensured that she remained imprisoned by her own bitterness, a stark contrast to Eleanor, who, despite the initial humiliation, emerged with her spirit enriched and her value affirmed by a community that recognized her true worth. The ripple effects within the city's corporate and social spheres were subtle, yet significant. There was a palpable, albeit unstated, increase in awareness regarding the treatment of service and support staff. Companies began to invest more earnestly in ethics training, not merely as a compliance exercise, but with a genuine understanding of the reputational risks associated with a culture of disrespect. The philanthropy ball incident had demonstrated, in a very public and uncomfortable way, that the old boys club mentality, which often turned a blind eye to the excesses of its members, was no longer tenable in an era of heightened social consciousness and instant digital dissemination of information. The Eleanor's Steps movement, that spontaneous expression of appreciation for essential workers, evolved into organized annual events, further embedding the story's lessons into the city's collective memory. It became a way for the community to actively practice the values of respect and gratitude that Eleanor embodied. The Eleanor Vance Dignity Fund, meanwhile, became a powerful institution, its influence extending beyond direct aid to shaping policy and promoting educational initiatives. It championed legislation for fair wages and safer working conditions, and its workshops on workplace dignity were adopted by businesses across various sectors. David Vance, in his dual role as a successful architect and a dedicated philanthropist, continued to advocate for a more equitable and compassionate society. He often remarked that the most enduring structures are not built of concrete and steel, but of strong values and respectful relationships. His mother remained his moral compass, a constant reminder that true success is measured by one's positive impact on the world. The story's ultimate power lies in its universality. While the specifics were unique, the underlying themes of dignity versus arrogance, of quiet strength versus hollow power, resonated with people from all walks of life. It served as a powerful reminder that every individual, regardless of their profession or economic status, is deserving of respect, and that acts of kindness, however small, can have a profound impact, just as acts of cruelty can have devastating and far-reaching consequences. The narrative became a lesson not just in how not to behave, but in how to be, how to live a life of integrity, how to stand up for what is right, and how to find strength in humility and compassion. In conclusion, the incident involving Eleanor Vance and Victoria Sterling transcended a mere personal conflict to become a catalyst for broader societal reflection and change. It underscored that true power is not about dominance or control, but about influence wielded responsibly and ethically. It reaffirmed that while arrogance may offer a temporary illusion of superiority, it is ultimately a self-destructive force. And it celebrated the enduring, quiet strength of individuals like Eleanor Vance, whose lives, lived with integrity and grace, provide a far more compelling model for a just and compassionate world. The legacy is clear. The mud may wash away, but the stains of disrespect and the shine of true dignity leave indelible marks on the human spirit and the collective conscience.